world, you would expect contradictions within the teaching because it's not coming from all-wise God. It will have all those things. But if it is from God, it will be free from these contradictions. And that's what the Quran says. Ponder deeply on the Quran. If you ponder deeply, you would find no contradictions whatsoever. So this is, in fact, a challenge of falsification of this book, given by the book itself. Thirdly, the Quran says a book like this can never be produced by other than God. Whether a whole book like it, or 10 chapters like it, 10 surah like it, or even one surah or one chapter like it. You cannot bring anything like this Quran, even if you were to human beings and mankind gathered together in unison to do this job, they won't be able to. They will never be able to produce such like the Quran. That is the inimitability challenge of the Quran.
That's just what it says in the Quran. It doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean it's true.
Right. So what does people have to do? As the Quran says, if you doubt, وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِّثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين. This is how the ayah goes. If you are in doubt as to what Allah has revealed to His servant Muhammad, then produce a chapter or a surah like unto this Quran, like unto this chapter. If you cannot do it, seek your helpers besides God to do this. If you cannot do it, and you'll certainly not be able to do it, then fear the hellfire whose fuel is man and stone. That's what the challenge of the Quran is.
Have you read Lord of the Rings?
Have I read?
Lord of the Rings.
No.
It's a very, very good book. I don't know how it compares to the Quran because I haven't read the Quran.
Do you know what the Quranic challenge is? Bringing a chapter like unto this Quran. In the Arabic language, there are different forms of literature. Prose, poetry, the statements of soothsayers, we call kahin. You can categorize them. Yeah? The Quran is totally unique in its linguistic genre. What the Quran is saying to the Arabs at that time who were masters in their language, bring something like it, because you have excelled in your language so much that you would put your best poetry and hang it on the wall of the Kaaba. You call the mu'allaqat. And the longer it says, the better the poem is. Okay, produce something like the Quran if you're able to. So when the Quran came, let's understand the Quran first rather than comparing someone else. Why is it that we are able to imitate Shakespeare, but we're not able to imitate the Quran? What prevents it? Because the Quran has in its linguistic structure that it is beyond human imitation. There are scholarly, academic type level work done to demonstrate the very objective nature of this challenge. Because one can say, oh, you're just subjectively bringing a point like the Quran may be very eloquent, very nice, very moving. None of that. Quran maybe, and it is eloquent. Quran maybe, and it is very moving and very touching. But that's not the argument of the Quran. The Quran is giving you a challenge to imitate something like it. Something like it means the way the Quran itself is structured.
So, okay, let me ask you. If it's not the eloquence, if it's not the structure, the eloquence...
It is the structure.
It's the structure?
Yes.
What about the structure?
Yes. What about it? So something like the Quran is knowing the stylistics of the Quran. You know, every author or a writer have their own style of writing. By that style, you can say, this is written by Shakespeare. This is written by Homer. This is written by Wordsworth. This is written by you, whatever, right? And you can say that particular piece is definitely from Shakespeare, or definitely not from Shakespeare, because of the way the styles. This is the literary textual criticism when we do. So when we look at certain works, we can say, look, this is the styles that the author uses, and this one is totally unique. So when the Quran came to us, it came with its own stylistics of delivery. The speech of the Quran, the way it is read, every surah or chapter of the Quran is unique in its style. You might find it strange, but it is so. None of the surahs are actually alike, but it might resonate to be the same. So that's one of the very, fascinating work that has been done. If you compare Surah Al-Layl, one of the chapter, with what's the other surah? Surah Dawah or something, very close to each other. They sound very similar at the ending, but their structure is different. The Quran uses the rhetorical features known in the Arabic languages such a way that it far exceeds the number of words within any chapter of the Quran. So if you have a chapter which has, say, 19 words, the rhetorical features employed within it will far exceed that number. Now, how do you match something like it is the real challenge. So when the Quran uses something that you would not be able to imagine, for example, I'll give you one example only. The Quran says, Maliki Yawmiddin, that God is the king, the owner, the master of the day of judgment, right? What's so unique about it? When it was revealed and spoken and recited, the Arabs knew within their linguistic repertoire, they had no such a concept of someone can be the master or the owner or the king of time. You can be the king or owner of a house, of a horse, of a sword, of a land, but you can't be owner of a second, of a minute, of a month, of a year, because you can't own time. So they didn't have, just to make this point, they had no such concept that you can own time. So the one when the Quran came saying, Maliki Yawmiddin is the owner of a day where there will be judgment. They could not imagine anything like it. How do you bring something like that? Because it's not something that in their linguistic repertoire.
Are you saying that concept didn't exist?
Not in the Arabic corpus.
How do you know this person that wrote the Quran? How do you know they didn't get this from India, which did exist? It existed for thousands of years.
So let's understand. Let's understand some things. He's the what? Controller of time.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the Arabic corpus, so you're saying now we have documentary evidence that the Hindus passed that information to the Arabic.
How do you know it didn't?
No. You are now saying, how do you know they didn't have spaceships?
No, I'm not saying that.
I'm saying they had spaceships.
No, you're not.
I'm just telling you now, they had spaceships. So now, how would you now refute my point that they did not have spaceships? I'm saying they had spaceships.
Well, this is not the point.
But do you see my point is?
No, I don't see it.
You are arguing on the basis of the absence of evidence. Where is the evidence?
What evidence?
Where is the evidence that the Arabs knew and the Arabs used in their everyday language or in their poetry or in their prose that they can be king or owner of time?
I'm saying that the general population might not have had that concept in their repertoire, but there were merchant travelers who would go all the way across Asia, and I'm sure ideas and philosophies.
The idea should be documented then within the Arabian.
Not necessarily.
Within the Arabian Peninsula, even within the Muslims became very advanced. Is later after Islam came. This is what we need to really put this in place.
Scholars and people that travelled from the
like
beginning
who?
of time.
Within the Arabian Peninsula,
Socrates, he went to Egypt.
Yeah. The knowledge of Socrates.
The Egyptians were trained in Egypt. The Greeks.
Socrates, right?
Sorry, the Greeks were trained in Egypt, and they taught others in the Middle East. So this is like thousands of years before Islam. So
his teaching, Socrates' teaching in the Arabian Peninsula, they had that teaching.
Maybe,
that yes.
Maybe.
No. I'm not interested in maybes. When we examine a claim, we can't just say maybes. Maybe they had spaceships, maybe they didn't.
It's likely that there was.
No, it's not about likelihood. Likelihood they had spaceships, because how would the Prophet go in space?
As a historian, you have to acknowledge that the proximity of certain cultures and ideas.
You have to establish the evidence rather than saying
there is evidence. There is a lot of
so
evidence.
Where is the evidence that the Arabic linguistic repertoire had the concepts that they can be king or owner of time? That's all I'm asking.
Well,
what you need to produce
is
a linguistic evidence from Arabian Peninsula, from any of the cultures,
Okay, let me give you.
Arab
Let me give you
or non-Arabs.
Sanskrit, the Sanskrit language. You know, English is based on the Sanskrit language.
I
So
don't.
Sanskrit comes from India. Yeah, you know that. Sanskrit.
From India?
Yeah, Sanskrit. You know
Okay,
Sanskrit?
carry on.
So English is based on the alphabet is from Sanskrit. The English language is one of its roots is Sanskrit. A lot of European
And what
languages-
is Sanskrit based on? Which language?
It's an ancient Indian language.
No, Sanskrit is based on what?
I don't know.
Because
I
the
think-
language I speak is based on Sanskrit. And I don't think the Sanskrit English is based on Sanskrit. Maybe some words here and there, but to say this whole of, do you have evidence from the linguistic scholars?
The alphabet is definitely, there's definitely a lot of evidence.
Do you have, so the scholarly community agrees the English alphabet is based on the Sanskrit alphabet?
There's a lot of evidence, yeah, that I've read, yeah.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I can look into it. But what's the relevance?
So the relevance is, you're saying the ideas, it's impossible that the ideas wouldn't have spread from India to the Middle East.
We need evidence. Where is the evidence?
Well, it's in the Quran. You're saying that there's,
Look.
someone says in the Quran that he can become the Lord of time. I'm saying that's the evidence.
Your evidence is, you know what? It's
You're trying to
likelihood.
tell me this is,
No,
it's
I've
impossible
just given
that
you-
it came from a human being because they didn't have this idea.
No, I'm saying
it
the
existed,
structure
but it
of the
wasn't in that
Quran.
area.
The structure of the Quran is not something the Arab within their customs of the language can imitate something like that because they won't speak like it. They don't speak like it. For example, if I
Doesn't
say,
matter. It could have been from someone who wasn't from the area. It doesn't necessarily mean
look.
it's from God.
so even the Quran says, you know, the Prophet has learned from someone else. Who? Where is the evidence?
Wait, the Quran
The
says,
Quran is in pure Arabic. That's the Quran says. And what they're alluding to, someone like a Roman, someone who's a Persian, and now saying someone who is Indian. You have to have evidence for it. This is not how, historical criticism work. Where is the evidence that yes, the Prophet ﷺ learned from anyone? Where's the evidence? You have to show the convergence of the information, the transmission of the information, the possibility of the information. Where? They knew he was growing with them. For 40 years, they knew that he didn't speak a lie. He was called as-Sadiq al-Amin, the trustworthy, the reliable, truthful one. He grew up among them. And then when he came at the age of 40, God made him into a prophet. He went into a Mount Safa. Was that Mount Safa? One of the mountains. And he called people. And when the people came, he says, if I told you there is an army waiting behind the mountain to attack you, would you believe me? Do you know what they said? We would believe you because we have not heard a lie from you ever. We know no lies from you. You're a truthful person. Then when he said, now I am made a prophet of God, worship none but God, then they started rejecting him. So he was already testified by his community that he was a truthful, the reliable, the trustworthy individual. So if they knew him brought like this and you're now saying, oh, he learned from him, they would have found his teacher. When the Quran says no one taught him this is a revelation from God, they would have said, oh, you learned from him, you learned from her, you learned from them, and they would have discredited him. Nothing they could come up with.
Okay, it doesn't, even if it was from himself or from God, well, I would say, there's many people who claim to have revelation from God. But
So we need to
I'm
now
not
examine the Quran. Many people claim to have revelation from God, and you can examine each one. So you can give me an example and I can examine it.
There's thousands, even today, there's thousands.
No, you can examine as much as you want, but look at the Quran. If you fail to match something like the Quran, if you fail to bring a contradiction within the Quran, then the claim of the Quran still stands. These are, out of many, 2 falsification tests. In science, when we come up with something, we can say, this is how I have conducted the research. You can falsify my research by saying it's not reproducible. Quran has given us, at least in my example, I've given you 2 falsification tests. If you were to meet them, you have falsified the Quran.
I've already falsified one about.
What have you falsified?
About the example of the concept of it being.
I gave you
the
one
Lord of Time.
statement from
Well, that was the
one
only-
example.
that was the only
If I
example,
give you the
so-
whole chapter and I give you the analysis, unfortunately it's not available in English because the nature of the work is in Arabic. If you were to show this, no. If you were to, look what I'm saying. If you were to take to an Arabic professor who's not a Muslim, so that will be an unbiased criticism, right? Or a critique, a critic will do the critique. Take it to a professor in Oxford or Cambridge or SOAS or Harvard, wherever you want, a non-Muslim Arabic expert, and say, this is a chapter and this is what the Quran is saying, bring something like it. Now, if they're able to, with their help or someone else, then you would say, we have met the challenge. 1400 and almost 40 years, yeah? The challenge has been gone on. Why is it that people are unable to meet? Are you saying Muslim scholarship, they're all hypocrites because they know as an academic scholars that this can be matched, but they clinged on to the Quran saying it's from God?
Okay, let me answer that question. So, religion is the same everywhere.
It's not.
Mosques exist, temples exist. It's the same everywhere. Essentially, you have the temples or mosques, and you have the congregation, you have the preachers. The preachers and the temples or mosques, they have funding, you know, and it's also a very good way of controlling people. So unfortunately, you have the situation where people who are not necessarily religious occupy these positions of religious authority. They control the population, they control the resources, the wealth, the food, everything, and they corrupt the population and the congregation, and they interpret the religion in their own way for political gain. So what I'm saying is, essentially, you know, the reason why, like, you know, there wouldn't be any refutation of any of this is because they had too much interest in protecting religion. Every religion has a lot of interest.
So forget about every religion for now.
In protecting.
So in Islam,
no, because this is the point. This is my point. Every religion is interested in protecting itself from any serious criticism or scrutiny. So
I disagree. I'll tell you why I disagree.
Okay, well, let me just finish. So, for hundreds of years, Islam has existed in the Middle East, and it's, you know, in recent times it's spread more. I mean, you know, there was the Ottoman Empire was quite big. So yeah, it's been actually it's quite a large Muslim empire. Anyway, you understand. So like, you know, the Muslim empire is quite big. So, but the thing is, the authorities within Islam, they protect the religion from serious scrutiny, and I believe that ultimately all religions are doing this. You know, all religions protect themselves from any kind of like serious scrutiny to just, you know, to really analyze whether it's from God or.
Okay. You know. So let's start what I disagree with firstly.